So when I start talking about limiting beliefs and mindset shift, it was that I learned that I can do things outside of medicine. I can be a doctor and be other things. I can be a real estate investor, be an author, be an entrepreneur. These are all things that came much later, but it took a long time for me to kind of open up my own mind and get past my own limiting beliefs to realize that these are things that I'm capable of. Because for so long, it was just a story I told myself that I could not do these other things.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! 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 Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schloe. Tonight's a really fun episode. It's a bit different than other episodes that we've done. This one is not really heavily focused on real estate. This one is actually focused on a children's book author. Really cool podcast and just very unique. Dr. Michele Cho Dorado is joining us today. She was a pediatric gastroenterologist, and she's now transitioned as a medical director doing utilization review, which has given her time to focus on some other things that she loves: her family, becoming a children's book author, investing in real estate, and many more things as well. She wrote an incredible book called Reach for the Stars, and we were even so lucky to get a copy of it sent to the Schloe household, which my son Jack really enjoyed. An incredible children's book that helps introduce basic financial concepts to kids in a way that they can understand, in a way to give them that financial knowledge that they'll need going forward. I really wish we had books like this when I was a kid. I think it would have been a complete game changer. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and start this episode. And as always, if you learned something from this, if you benefited from this, please share this podcast with a friend and go ahead and subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review as well if you feel inclined. Thank you so much. Let's get started with this awesome episode with Dr. Michele Cho Dorado. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. So glad that you're here. Today we have a really cool guest. My friend Dr. Michele Cho Dorado is here with us. Typically we focus largely on real estate for physicians and properties, but this is a really cool opportunity to talk about some real estate and a whole nother avenue of business, writing children's books. So this is going to be a really cool podcast and a really cool opportunity to hear about something that we probably all thought about doing. I know I have, and don't think I have the creative abilities to actually do that. So it'll be really cool to hear from an incredible author. So Michele, so glad that you're here. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time. Really glad to have you here. So if you don't mind just kind of telling the audience a little bit about your journey into medicine, that'd be fantastic.
So I'm by training a pediatric gastroenterologist. And I guess the short version is that I practiced for about 8 years. And I think 8 years into practice, I just at some point realized that I had not received much financial education and just kind of got to this point where I kind of felt financially illiterate. And around that time, I had come across some communities of other doctors and just realized that I really am not the only one. Like, it's not a unique story. A lot of doctors go through all this training and are very poor through residency and fellowship, and then start making attending salaries and come upon making double, triple their income and just don't really know how to manage it well. And I was definitely in that boat. Many doctors find themselves highly in debt, and just things like investing and real estate, kind of what you're talking about here, was never on my radar. And so around this time, like I mentioned, I kind of came across a community of physicians who were talking about finance and talking about financial discussions. And then I came across a group of doctors that talked about real estate, and it was just it just blew my mind. I started learning more about that, and it just, for me, really was a mindset shift for me. I just, until that point, had always thought I was just only good in medicine. I never considered thinking about business, or I just kind of assumed I wasn't good with money. And it was just one of those things where I had all these limiting beliefs about who I was and what I could do. And once I started kind of learning more about this and educating myself, I started reading up on personal finance and real estate investing and mindset and personal growth and tax strategies. And it just kind of opened up my mind to what's out there. So kind of going back to the beginning, you asked me to talk about my journey in medicine, really changed the trajectory of my career, actually, because I think once I started learning all these new things about myself. I was also in the transition of leaving practice. I have 2 young kids and had thought about leaving practice to rebalance work-life balance, I guess I can say. And so in that transition, I left practice, started working in utilization review as a medical director to work remotely and have more flexibility with my time. And that allowed me to have more mental energy to kind of focus on some of these other things that I guess we can discuss, but including real estate. Yeah. And writing a book.
That's awesome. You've done a lot. What were some limiting beliefs that you had? It sounds like kind of more imposter syndrome to a degree, or like you had the lack of financial education, so you were kind of scared to take the next steps or take the leap. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Well, I would say that all throughout training, fellowship, even early on in my career, I just had always assumed that I wasn't good with money. And it's something that I'd never taken the time to learn because I just told myself it was something that I wasn't good at. So it was kind of like out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. And it wasn't until I got married and my husband kind of started planting some seeds about paths to retirement and making passive income. And these are things I just had never even thought about. And so one of the biggest limiting beliefs for me was that I wasn't good with money. And so I just, again, didn't really take the time to understand it because I didn't think I would understand it even if I tried. And then the other thing was that the only thing I could do was medicine. I feel like when you follow medicine, it's just such a narrow path and you're so focused on getting to the next step, right? Going from medical school to residency to fellowship. There's always that next laid out for you. And so there's not really much room to wiggle out of that. And I was typical type A, like work hard type of medical student and physician, where that's where my focus was. And that was my whole identity. And so when I start talking about limiting beliefs and mindset shift, it was that I learned that I can do things outside of medicine. I can be a doctor and be other things. I can be a real estate investor, be an author, be an entrepreneur. These are all things that came much later, but it took a long time for me to kind of open up my own mind and get past my own limiting beliefs to realize that these are things that I'm capable of. Because for so long, it was just a story I told myself that I could not do these other things.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to overcome those limiting beliefs. It is exactly what you said. We get so focused on being a doctor and taking care of patients in residency, and like you said, that whole path is laid out for us. And then we get to that point, and for whatever reason, start to think about, hey, maybe there is something else that I want to do, or some other interest I have, or I want to invest, or I want to do business. But then you're like, well, I've spent all this time to become a pediatric gastroenterologist or a family medicine doctor. Like, I feel like sometimes you almost think like, oh, was that wrong of me to have spent all this time doing that, to then kind of pivot towards something else? Is that
Yeah.
something that you struggled with at all?
Yeah, definitely. It was a huge identity crisis because for me, again, for so long, I felt my calling was to go into medicine and be a pediatric gastrologist. And so when I started thinking about even transitioning out of practice, it took me a couple of years actually to process that transition because it was from when I had my first kid to when I had my second, which was about 2 years. And I just couldn't emotionally process it. I was still fairly young in my career. And there were some other things going on. I think that we had talked about moving geographically. And so doing this allowed that transition as well. But yeah, it was a hard transition because again, for me to leave something that I thought was my calling and then do something different. And now I have found fulfillment and am fulfilling my passion in other ways. But it wasn't until I was able to kind of get past some of those things, like the limiting beliefs that we talked about before, and no regrets now. I mean, obviously I feel very lucky and thankful for like where we're at now, but it was a bit of a tough transition just emotionally. And again, like you understand, like you put so much into getting to where you are. And so to leave that behind, it was difficult.
Yeah. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that. I'm sure there's people listening to this that are in a similar position who really want to take that next leap, but they're scared what that might look like. So thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that. Was there any specific like books or podcasts or resources that were really helpful for you in that transition as you started to educate yourself more?
Yeah. So I think this is a common book for a lot of people that start out down this path. But Rich Dad, Poor Dad was definitely one of them. And then just when it came to learning about like personal finance, I feel like The Simple Path of Wealth was a really good one for me. That was one of the starter books I read. And then when I got into real estate investing, I read Brandon Turner's real estate book. I read The Millionaire Investor. Actually, that year that I left practice and started working remotely, I'll have to tell you, I just had so much more mental energy that I read a ton that year. I can give you like a list of 20 books that year that I read, but those are some of the beginning ones that were helpful. In terms of mindset, I think the ones that have been the most impactful for me have been The Go-Giver is one of them.
Love that book.
The Gap and the Gain,
Mhm.
Who Not How. Those were some of the top ones that I felt were the most impactful.
Those are all fantastic books. If you haven't read any of those books that Michele just talked about, you have to. They're game changers for sure. And we'll put some links to those in the show notes, so check those out. Yeah, all great books. It's fun because everyone's journey, it seems like for the most part, starts with Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It just, and that also is just such a huge mindset shift from assets and liabilities and just really the freedom that can come with financial freedom and cash flow and passive income. That book is a game changer. My journey started the same way with the good old purple book. So, well, what did things look like from a real estate perspective for you after the pivot?
So in that transition where I was leaving practice, so I had to give a 6-month notice to my group. So I had 6 months to kind of plan our move and kind of make that transition. And in that time frame is when I came across the group of physicians that talked about real estate, and I ended up kind of getting plugged into a real estate community and learned and did some reading that way. And so because I was in Chicago at the time and we were moving to Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte, North Carolina, the real estate market was really hot at that time. And so once we planted our roots here and bought a house, like our primary residence, which we bought without actually even seeing it because it was during COVID. Once we planted our seeds here, then we started purchasing properties here and started looking. So Charlotte's been our primary market. But yeah, we have gotten a couple properties here and started doing some syndications as well, and like investing passively. I mean, not running syndications, but so we've kind of have a little bit of a diverse portfolio with long-term rentals, short-term rentals, and passive investments.
That's awesome. What's been your favorite investment vehicle?
Well, the long-term rentals are, I would say, very steady, and at least in my opinion. But the STRs have been fun.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like a little up and down, and depending on where you're at, it can be a bit seasonal. But I've been enjoying it. Like we've been managing everything on our own, and it surprised me that I enjoy it as much. Like I feel like there's some hospitality that's involved, and I haven't minded at all. I haven't minded interacting with the guests, and it's been actually pretty fun.
I'd agree. We have a couple of short-term rentals as well, and it's really fun interacting with them. Definitely seems like everything breaks at the worst time. It's always like Saturday morning or Friday night or something like that. But it has been a lot of fun. Yeah, we just had a guest up at one of our properties up in Colorado in the mountains, and the power went out early in the morning, and they were calling me, and I was trying to talk them through like checking the breakers and all these other things. Well, we checked all these things, and I was like, I'm sorry, there's really nothing else that we can do at this point. We've talked to the power company, and they were all upset. And then ultimately, like an hour later, the power company turned the power back on.
Yeah.
Everything was fine. But it always seems like it's right at the least opportune time to rental.
We had in North Carolina, like really cold, freezing weather over Christmas. And pipes were freezing like all over the state. And we had a guest like on Christmas Eve, the pipes froze. And
No.
it had no water. Luckily, they had been displaced from another home where the pipes had, I think, burst. And so they ended up coming to our place. And because they had to leave another Airbnb because pipes burst to come to our place, like they were a little bit more in a rush to leave. Yeah, to your point, Christmas Eve.
Yeah, Christmas Eve, exactly. It's always something. It is fun though. It's a blast, like getting to be a part of people's vacations and experience. My wife does a lot of interior design and photography work and so forth. And so it's been really cool for her too to design these properties and stage them and photograph them. And it's been a fun way to get to invest in real estate together. So that's really cool. Are the short-term rentals and long-term rentals, are those all in North Carolina for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. That's awesome. Well, let's talk about the book. Like, what was the idea behind writing a children's book and becoming an author?
So kind of going back to what I had mentioned earlier about just my own feeling and realization of being financially illiterate. I mean, I was like almost 40 when I'm like learning these things. And so we had at the time had very young kids, and my husband and I, we just decided that our kids were going to learn these things early on. And even though they were 1 and 3 at the time, there's some resources out there, I would say, for like older kids, teens and things like that. But there really wasn't a lot that I could find for like that really young age group. And obviously they can't even read yet. So it was just something that I felt like I wanted to provide a resource for my own kids. And I made it in the form of like a picture book just to be kind of fun. And And my thought was that I'm just going to introduce these words to them, just exposing them to the words. If they hear it, then hopefully over time they hear it enough and it sinks in and they'll at least like recognize what these words are. And so that was kind of my thought behind it. And then again, it was another thing where I was like, it was hard for me to see myself as an author. Like I didn't call myself an author for so long. And I didn't even actually tell anybody that I was writing a book for until like right before it came out, because I don't know, like it was just like a mindset block, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so I got the book published and it just came out this past year in March and it's been exciting. Once I got things started moving and like the book came out, I felt like there was more to provide in terms of content. And I just kind of wanted to share more of what I've been learning and help other parents too. And so then I developed a platform, the Bright Futures EAG platform, to start sharing more of the content. And I'm working on developing that just because I felt like there was more to it and there was a greater purpose behind it than just one book. So yeah, that's kind of how that started.
That's so cool. I want to talk to you kind of more about the process, like how you come up with it and get it illustrated and all those sorts of things. But I do want to thank you first for sending me a copy to my son, Jack. We read it. We got it yesterday. We read it tonight and it was really fun. Really great book. He loved it for multiple reasons. One, the main character's name is Mimi, and Mimi is Jack's grandma's name. So Mimi, if you're listening to this, we were talking about you a lot tonight. And also he's really into space and it's all about reaching for the stars. And Mimi is saving up to try and buy this telescope that she really wants. And she's learning about investing and learning a lot of financial principles as the book goes on. And it was really cool. Jack really wants to buy a rocket ship though. So he's going to have to save a little bit longer for that. But yeah, it was a great book. Thanks so much for sending it. And we'll be sure to put links to it in the show notes. But getting back to it, so how did you come up with the title, Reach for the Stars? And how long did it take you to develop this book and kind of figure out the whole timeline of writing it and getting it published? What did that all look like for you?
It was totally new for me and there's a lot to learn in the process. I just was totally naive to the whole process. And so I just joined like different author groups just to kind of learn. And at the beginning, like nothing resonated. I didn't know what anyone was talking about. But from beginning to end, from writing the manuscript to it actually getting published, it was a 2-year process for me.
Wow.
I'm sure like once you kind of know what to do and have your people in place, it's much faster. But yeah, for me, because it was my first time and I just really like knew nothing about it, it took 2 years from beginning to end. But I just learned who to get on my team. I think the Illustrator probably was the biggest part of it because I think pictures will really bring your story to life. And so finding an illustrator that resonates with your story, I think is important. So I was really happy and thankful to find a good illustrator.
That's awesome. Yeah, the illustrations are fantastic, very colorful and engaging. When you're looking for an illustrator, are you like looking at Upwork or Fiverr, or is there a different resource that you go to find illustrators for a children's book?
So I have heard of people looking on Fiverr, Upwork, or even there's some author Facebook communities where there are illustrators on there, so people will connect through that medium. I personally found my illustrator on there's like a society of children's book authors and writers and illustrators. So that's where I found mine. I just went through different people's portfolios and kind of found one that resonated and like with the style. And then I just reached out to her and she was actually the first person I reached out to and we just connected. So she's an illustrator out of Japan and we just FaceTimed and just like, she's laid back, I was laid back, and I was like in no rush, and just our conversation was easy. And so I was able to kind of get across what I was looking for, and that worked out well. And then everything else just kind of like I found an editor who kind of helped develop and help with certain parts of the story. And then part of the story was, in addition to just financial words, I really wanted to also inspire kids to think big and be bold and be confident and share their ideas. And so that's part of the story as well, as empowering kids to be leaders and be entrepreneurs and think for themselves. And so that's part of the story as well.
Yeah, I really like too how you tied in giving as part of it. Mimi's
Yeah.
saving up for her telescope, working really hard at her lemonade stand, but she's also taking some of her money and buying her family Christmas presents. And it was really cool to see that be a piece of it as well, and donating some to charity. And then she still has enough money to buy her telescope ultimately and is still really happy with that. And so I think that's a really cool piece for kids to hear as well, and kind of get introduced also to how great it is to give and how good it feels to give. And so I think that was really cool.
Yeah.
So thanks for including that as well.
Thank you. I think also like having some delayed gratification. I think kids are just, especially lately, everything's so prime. Everyone's so primed to just get instant gratification and just watching TV and the media and the way advertising targets kids. I think that it's very hard to giving and kind of sharing and waiting and that all those types of things.
It sure is. It's good to have good resources like this to help with that for sure. As a parent, what do your kids think about you being an author and writing a book?
So they love it. I
Yeah,
think I included some of inspiration from them in the book. And
cool.
so, like I said, Mimi was the name of my son's baby blanket. And so that's the name of the character. So they see that. And then I actually sent a picture of my family, like a Christmas card to my illustrator. And there's parts of the story, like with the family sitting together, where she
Yeah,
kind of like makes it look like us a little bit. And so they think that's funny.
that's got to be so
Um,
cool.
and then I was able to do an author vendor event this past spring. And so the kids came with. And so that was fun for them to be there and kind of watch people come and buy the book. And they were like, they seemed very proud, which was fun to see.
That's really cool. What is it like getting a book published? Is it a lot of kind of back and forth, or how's that process work?
So it depends. There's a difference between getting traditionally published and self-publishing. And so when you get traditionally published, all the pieces of getting a book together are in-house. And so they do all of that for you. It's just hard to get traditionally published. And people have asked me about that. So my advice would be to find a literary agent first. I didn't know to get an agent when I first looked into this. I had thought about getting traditionally published and I pitched my manuscript to publishers just individually, like people that were publishers that were accepting submissions. I didn't know about getting a literary agent. So I just pitched to publishing companies that were accepting submissions. I ended up getting 2 contract offers from hybrid publishers, which is like you put some of the upfront cost and then they publish it and they do some marketing. I just didn't know enough about the process at the time, and people had given me different advice, like I guess varying advice about working with hybrid publishers, although I do know some people that have gone that route. But at the time, I had already had an illustrator, I had my editor, and all the pieces that a publisher would normally do for you, I had kind of already done on my own. And so I just chose at the end to self-publish, which was a good decision for myself. But it's like anything, and everyone's journey is so different. And so I think depending on what your goals are with the book, some people prefer to try to find a traditional publisher. Some people want to self-publish. They have a little bit more control, but then like marketing can be difficult. And so sometimes the publisher, depending on how much of a budget they're willing to give for you, can help market your book. But from what I know, most of the big publishers will really only take submissions through an agent. So
Okay.
that would be my advice for anybody wanting to traditional publish. I would suggest finding an agent.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for that. That's really helpful. What's next steps for writing children's books? Is this going to become a series for you?
So I'm actually working on a series. So
Oh,
I do
cool.
hope to have some more.
That's awesome. Still along the financial education pathway, I'm assuming?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely want to kind of expand on that. And I feel like there's more to teach in that realm. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's pivot a little bit to Bright Futures EDG, and what do you hope that to look like, and what's kind of the big goal for that going forward? I know certainly financial education for children, and we need a whole lot of it. So I'm really excited about this platform.
Yeah. So this is mostly more like education and content. So it's still developing. It's still in the early phases, but I just launched a blog post section and doing some newsletters. But again, I want to develop my book series to kind of supplement that. And there's a bunch of like activity sheets on there. So it's a website where all the activity sheets are downloadable for free. And it's just like a mix of like fun activities and educational things like mazes and word searches, but then things where kids can match money like coins and dollars just to kind of expose them that way visually. Also, like there's a growth mindset piece to it as well. And all these things that I feel like I learned in the past year and how I've grown, I feel like, why can't we teach our kids those things too? Because I think they go hand in hand with financial literacy. Honestly, I think when you're more financially literate and also like thinking positively, feeling empowered, I think it builds leadership. I think it builds self-confidence. And I think these are all things that our age kids growing up in this generation, I think would really benefit from.
Yeah, that's really cool. I completely agree. I'm really excited to see how this grows for you. And I'm definitely going to sign up for the newsletter. And I know Jack will really enjoy with those free activity sheets. So thanks for putting all that out there for
Sure.
free. It's really cool and going to be really helpful for a lot of kids. Certainly, if us as physicians don't get any financial education, I didn't get it as a kid either. So it's so great that all these kids are going to be reached by this and have that at least foundation for financial knowledge going forward. So I think they're going to be in a way better place than we were for sure.
I hope so. That's definitely my goal.
That's really cool. How long do you think it'll be before you get another book out? Do you think this one will be a little bit faster than 2 years, or I think it'll be about the same timeline?
I think so. So I do actually have the manuscripts with my illustrator now that she's working on. So I hope by the end of this year to have at least another book out.
That'll be awesome. Yeah, looking
Yeah.
forward to reading it. That's very exciting. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't pivot back to gastroenterology for a second and just ask you what the weirdest thing was that a kid swallowed that you had to
Oh
remove.
my gosh. I mean, the usual things are like batteries and like you see food boluses, and I've taken like marbles, multiple marbles out of a kid before. Some of the older kids, the weirdest thing I would say is a plastic fork and a Bic pen.
When I was in residency, my friend and I, we started a Instagram page called Doc Turds. I think it still exists. We haven't posted anything in a long time, but we had a board in residency where we like just took like snippets of funny patient encounters or notes and we put it on this board. And so we were like, hey, what if we put some of that on Instagram? And of course, it was all HIPAA compliant and everything. We had some foreign body images and x-rays from different encounters and so forth. And so we started posting those as a Foreign Body Friday and having people guess what they were. And long story short, it took off. We were getting hundreds of people liking these and commenting on it. It was crazy. And then we got an email from, I'm trying to think of what the network was, but it was affiliated with Discovery, like TV. And they asked us if we wanted to do a TV show that was essentially Foreign Body Friday. It was going to be,
Yeah.
like it, but it was going to be very dramatized. And then everyone was going to guess what it was. And I'm in the military and family medicine. And they were like, oh, we'll just come to the hospital and we'll just film there. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen on a military base. And two, like these pictures that we posted are a collection of many years. It's not like every day someone's coming in with something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny. And ultimately, I think there was a TV show that was made that was called Stuck or something like that, that
Oh,
was
really?
from that same network.
Well,
So
it
I
was
had
so weird because before I left practice, like the year before I left, there was an increase in number of foreign body ingestions of water bottle caps. I was thinking, like, what is it with the water bottle caps? And
yeah.
apparently kids would like poke a hole at the top and like squeeze it into their mouth. And then it would just like somehow they'd swallow it. But those were always very difficult. Like it was always a joint effort between ENT and GI, like
Yeah.
getting called in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah, I bet that was a fun call to get. That's
But
awesome.
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't miss those overnight calls.
I bet not. What's the transition been to utilization review? What's that look like for you?
So it's 100% remote. That was one of the big draws in terms of the work, just having some more flexibility and predictability with my schedule, with the young kids, and just having more time with the family and being able to prioritize that. So that was a big part of it. I'd mentioned to you that we were looking to move geographically. So that also allowed us time to move outside of where we were in Chicago at the time. But it's been great, honestly. I've been enjoying the work. And like I said, I've just had more mental energy to do a lot of these other things that I didn't when I was in practice. I think when you're in practice, you're just like on all day, right? And you get home and my brain was just fried and I couldn't read another thing, And so that's been a huge shift. And again, it was a bit of a transition. And I think I went through like a grieving process of leaving practice. But now I'm 3 years out and I haven't looked back.
That's
Yeah.
exciting. If you don't mind me asking, what's kind
Yeah.
of day to day look like from that perspective? Do you kind of control your own hours, or are there still certain hours you have to work or anything like
Yeah. So you control your own hours. You have like a skeleton set schedule for the week. But with that said, it's flexible. Like you're able to move things around if you need to. And yeah, utilization review is basically looking at appropriateness and medical necessity of different procedures or radiology exams. And so I'm GI, so we look at GI procedures primarily. And yeah, so it's a mix of doing written cases and doing peer-to-peers, and I'm on a bunch of the committees. So I'm on the guideline committee. So we actually we review literature and make sure that our guidelines are as up to date as we can keep them. And so it's been good. I mean, I think I had some hesitations about this kind of work, and I remember what it was like being on the other side of peer-to-peers. So I was a little bit nervous about that, but it's been actually very pleasant and not at all. I think there's just a lot of misconceptions about what this type of work is. And now being in it, I mean, I see that very much. And so I've been really enjoying it.
That's really cool. Yeah. And it's probably fun too to keep you still right in the center of medicine and learning
Yeah.
more every day still about medicine and guidelines and changing those and really having a big impact that way as well, while
Yeah.
also having more control and I'm assuming a lot more time with the family. So I'm sure that's been
Yeah,
a good balance
for
for
sure.
you. That's awesome. Very cool. Well, before we wrap things up, is there anything else that you want to hit on? Anything else that we missed?
I mean, I don't think so. I feel like I kind of shared my journey, and it kind of fits into your passion of real estate as well. I think that played a huge part in my journey as well. I think once I started kind of shifting my mindset about what I can and can't do, real estate has played a huge part in that. And it's also been very exciting. I think a lot of people have been investing. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to invest. And I think that working towards financial freedom is a big motivator, right? And being able to provide for your family. And I think I love that you're increasing awareness about how to utilize real estate and to achieve those goals. So I applaud you and thank you for doing this as well.
Thank you. That really means a lot. Well, really excited to have you on here and couldn't do it without awesome guests like yourself. And it's really cool for me to get to talk to so many unique, incredible individuals who are doing all kinds of different things to get towards financial freedom and practice medicine how they want to. And it's really just really inspiring for me to see that. And I'm sure hopefully for the listeners as well. So thanks for your time.
Thanks
Is
for having me
there,
on.
yeah, absolutely. Is there a way that folks can get a hold of you or reach out to you if they want to buy the book and want to know more about Bright Futures?
So my website is www.brightfuturesedg.com, and I have contact information on there. You can email me at info@brightfuturesedg.com. The book is on there, all the resources on different topics, activity sheets, blogs, all the content's on there. So anyone can go on there and look at all that stuff for free.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely include links to that in the show notes. Thanks for putting all that together for us.
Yeah, thanks again.
Awesome. All right, Michele, thank you so much. With that, it's been Dr. Alex Schloe and Dr. Michele Cho Dorado with the Physicians and Properties podcast signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.